allocated to our use. This club is very service-oriented, so this is an extremely relevant and important presentation. We need to hear about SKYWARN. I'll just tell you very quickly that I did the SKYWARN training earlier this spring because Brendan made me do it, and I found it fascinating. And I actually have made 2 SKYWARN reports because I saw rotating clouds just north of my house one afternoon in the summer. Yeah, it wasn't just my head. That's right. Thank you, John. Okay. Quick announcement. If you have not signed the roster, the introvert is passing it around. Please keep him happy. Sign the roster. Let's see, there was one more thing I was supposed to say before we started the program. What was it? Who remembers? Not me. Okay. Well, whatever it was, it'll have to wait, or it wasn't that important anyway. I have an announcement. It's totally off the routine here, but we have one of our members, W4D, 5 watts. Count them, 5 watts. And a wire, 100 watts in a wire. That's way too much for her. She's going to do 5 watts in a wire, so we'll talk more about that later. Okay, Mr. Paul Savage is an expert, as I said, in SKYWARN stuff. He is Mr. SKYWARN for our local area, and I'm going to let him tell you the rest of the story. Oh, wait a minute. He's over here setting up. Oh, dear. Now I got to, you guys are going to be sorry. Now I got to tell more jokes or something. Okay. I need a 1-minute joke. Oh, no. Yeah, turn the microphone off, right? So, baseball. I just want to say thank you to all of you Nationals fans who showed up here tonight, because the game has already started, and I don't know who's winning. The game started 6 minutes ago. So it's tied 0-0 in the top of the first, right? All right. Okay, here we go, SKYWARN Support Group. So, Brendan's going to take care of the lights, and you want to use this microphone, is that right?
I just lost Chris Patton. He was here briefly, as he usually is. He got me into this business, and I was going to ask him, when I first talked to him, did he think I was an introvert or an extrovert? And he looked at me last and he said, way out there, extrovert. And I'll show you why here in a minute. This is not a SKYWARN class. This is a presentation, sort of a presentation that I give to ham radio groups. This is in fact the one that I gave to you guys 2-3 years ago. So what it's going to talk about is what is SKYWARN in general, how do hams fit into this, and then I throw in a sermon or two just to get your attention. See if this will work. I have the wrong one, but I'll do this one. ARRL and the National Weather Service a bunch of years ago came up with a memo of understanding that said that hams will coordinate the services, facilities, and equipment with National Weather Service in support of nationwide, state, and local early warning and emergency communications to enhance the nationwide posture of early weather warning and readiness for any conceivable weather emergencies. And if you think about it, in the last year, we've had pretty much all of the above. And there's no guarantee that we're not going to have more of the above this year. One of the slides that I may or may not have in this deck says, how many tornadoes were in Virginia so far this year? Huh? 17. Now, a lot of them were just EF zeros. One of them was up in our area, 2 of them. One was in Reston in April, about 8, 9 o'clock at night. Couldn't see it, but the weather forecasters were going bat screwy with that. I was out at Sterling that day. Oh, come on. Now, National Weather Service is split up into what they call weather forecast offices. And there are 122 of those in the United States. We're in one of them. Now, this doesn't count the Hurricane Center, it doesn't count Storm Prediction Center and all that kind of stuff. These are guys at an airport typically, just like down at Sterling. And their mission is to provide weather, hydrologic, and climate forecasts and warnings for the protection of life and property. What's hydrologic? Water. Well, we don't have any big bodies of, whoa, we do have the Chesapeake, all of the rivers, all the lakes. If you go down to the Riverwalk in Front Royal, Virginia, there's a hydrologic measuring station down there, and it feeds these guys. And on any given day, there is a forecaster in Sterling who's looking at all that data, monitoring. They come up with a lot of reports and a lot of history. Why amateur radio? There are about 760, and I've read a bunch of numbers plus or minus that, amateur radio operators in the United States. And really that includes, that was the licensing database, so some of those guys aren't with us anymore. My call sign, N4PSS, belonged to a guy down in Georgia. And when I wanted N4PSS, I looked up and sure, it even noted it was deceased. So I called the guy and got his wife, and he said, oh, he died 3 years ago, but he'd be glad for you to have his call sign. So I've got N4PSS. Amateur radio doesn't rely on commercial communications infrastructure. This is something I think everybody knows. You don't have to be hooked up to anything. You just have to have a radio and an antenna that can talk to another radio and antenna, or in our area and most areas throughout the United States, through a reader to the National Weather Service when other communications fail. Thus the logo, when all else fails. Ham radio's here. Sterling SKYWARN program uses amateur radio as our primary means of reporting severe weather to our forecasters in real time. We don't rely on anything else. As you'll see, we have some other capabilities built in, but they all rely on amateur radio. It's primarily done on FM, but we also have used Echolink, APRS, and all that other good stuff. I'm not a fan of all that other good stuff. Radio and a piece of wire, and I drive people crazy because they'll come up with this, WinLink Wednesday. Good friend of mine invented that, and it's taken off. It's all over the United States now. And I think it's great, but what happens when that doesn't work? Radio and a piece of wire. This is, if you don't know that we have handhelds, UHF, VHF, mobile, and multiband high-frequency transceivers. This is for a group of people other than you guys. This is my old radio in the truck that I just showed to show people that, yeah, we have them mobile now. I have an 8900 in the truck now. And I'll talk a little bit more about what my wife says about that later. Now, we work directly with National Weather Service Sterling. Do y'all know where that is? Out on the back road? Yep. And if you go by there and you look at that, that's the front of it, and the back of it is big glass windows there, and I'll show you some shots here in a minute of what that looks like inside. The key to this slide is we provide real-time ground truth about severe weather events happening in the CWA. What do we mean by ground truth? Anybody? What's actually happening? You'll see a picture of some of the desks and the monitors and so on they have at National Weather Service. Those guys are serious, serious guys, and that is some crazy, crazy capability that they have. They, I'm not so sure, jokingly say we can count hailstones. And they can sure in hell come close to that. But they don't know. They have a pretty good certainty that that's what's happening out in Linden, Virginia or whatever. But when I look out on my deck and it's already an inch deep in hailstones and pick up the phone and call them, work in the morning, sitting out on the back deck in the evening, tornado comes up the driveway, that's ground truth. What we currently do is support severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings. Typically when we bring SKYWARN up, you'll hear something like Virginia. The National Weather Service has just issued a tornado warning for the entire listening area of this repeater, or words to that effect. We'll go in and remind you that you need to have all your equipment and backup equipment checked and ready, and we'll tell you what kinds of things we want to have reported. Hurricane and tropical storm watches and warnings and the remnants of these systems. We've had one tropical storm watch since I've been doing this, and I forget the one that came up, but we don't have a script for it, so I had to sit down and write a script for a tropical storm. And that's, I forget which one that was. It was about 6 or 7 years ago. Flash flood watches and warnings. Winter storm watches and warnings, we keep this in here, but typically we do not activate during the winter. Now, we may activate, like I sit up at 1,500 feet in Linden, Virginia, and my wife and I are both spotters, and we will call in, but not on ham radio. That's a region, right? LWX, the last 3 digits, every National Weather Service office has a 3-digit indicator. And I'll even show you where you can go find out and look at what their weather forecast looks like. Directed nets on local repeaters. Now here's where the extrovert and introvert comes in. An introvert trying to get everybody's attention at going home time, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, coming out 50, 66 and so on. Can I have? Doesn't work. One of the things, and I wish Chris was still here, he'd say something. Chris Patton is the guy that got me into this business. And I was coming home from downtown. I was working down at Treasury. And he said he's looking for net controls who can be part of this SKYWARN gang. And so I diverted and went over and got through the gate and walked in there. And he asked me, he said, "Do you have any radio net control experience?" Yeah, I was in the Army, used radios a lot. I was a fire direction officer for a while. I had my own helicopter and my own gunships and all the Marine F-4s that I ever wanted, and I had to talk to them. I could see an introvert talking to an F-4 pilot, you know. And really, I'm not, maybe you'll disagree with me, a rabid extrovert, but I can turn it on. It comes up and says, this is the net. And if you try and come on with your local chat and so on, he, she, or it will cut you off. Hey, dude, this is a directed net, SKYWARN traffic only. So far, in the years I've been doing this, we haven't had that problem. Everybody understands, typically because they're driving through a hailstorm as we're talking, so they know it's a problem. We use report mode to get reports during less intense weather events. And a report mode can be either on the radio, and they'll call in reports of hail or strong thunderstorms or local flooding and that kind of stuff. But primarily, we're designed to be used in a weather significant event, like tornadoes coming down 66. That's pretty significant. SKYWARN Desk. This desk, and I want you to remember the 4 shelf supports there, because I'm going to show you a picture here, I think following this one, that'll tell you where that is. That's our setup in the operations center at Sterling. We're literally sitting right next to all the weather forecasters. And if I were to swing around in a chair when I'm looking at that computer screen or talking one of the radios, the chief controller is right there, the lead controller. So we are literally talking to these guys directly. Hey, Don, I have a problem. Tornado just took out 6 barns in somethingville. And they will turn around and ask us, are you getting any reports from so-and-so? There's probably a lot of flooding out there. And sometimes we'll turn the tables. We'll call out and say, anybody in the vicinity of 66 and so-and-so, let me know if you hit any flooding. And a couple of times we've gotten confirmation that, yeah, heavy rain produces flooding. Another thing about National Weather Service, initially all of the funding for that equipment, plus some more that we added, is contributed by hams. None of this is government equipment, with one exception, the PC. That's good news and bad news. That allows us to access National Weather Service stuff that's like reporting information and so on. But the bad news is we can't put things on it like WinLink. But that doesn't preclude me from bringing in my laptop, sitting it on the desk, and bringing up WinLink on Wi-Fi. And most of the people that go in there will bring their personal computers in there and set it up. They are very security conscious. It's interesting, National Weather Service and NOAA and all those guys, at one time will say we're security conscious, but sometimes if you look out there, they're one of the few government agencies that has the name, address, city, state, zip of all their employees on the web. Amazing. See the 4 desk supports? Well, the lead forecaster, and I'll just come over here and point him out. He isn't in this one. Sits right this side of the radio stuff. And then there are typically 3 or 4 or 5 other people in there working different parts of the weather forecast business. Oh, come on. Yeah, I've lost my... Yeah. Real-time communications. Now, you don't have to copy all these down. I'm going to leave a copy of this with you all, but I'll show you here in a second where you can get all the frequencies and all the information and more than you'd ever want. Our main SKYWARN net is a Blue Mountain repeater, 147-300, and that's the one that we'll initially bring up in SKYWARN mode. And you'll hear it. It's usually, this is N4 PSS, yada, yada, yada. SKYWARN is active, SKYWARN is active. And we put a WeatherNet tone up on the repeater. And then people start to wake up and very often will call in and say, oh, is SKYWARN up? Yep. Backup net, Rockville, 146.955. And the secondary backup, 145.210, High Knob. Now, High Knob was down for, oh golly, 3, 4, 5 months. We put a new antenna out there. All of the repeaters have been replaced and a whole bunch of other good stuff's been added out there. And we'll get that information out to everybody as soon as they finish. By the way, these repeaters are owned by hams. Watts Hill owns the High Knob repeater. He's been up there on the top of the mountains out there. And you know where High Knob is? Out 66, out 55. It's somewhere between Linden and Front Royal and up on top of the mountain. I think he's 2,800 feet up there. We also have a bunch of subnets, and again, I won't go through all of them, but I will show you where you can find out where they are. We go all the way out to, in fact, I'll be doing a class out in Moorfield, West Virginia. Going over the mountains in the middle of the night in the fog, that's a lot of fun. Hurricane WatchNet. We don't come up on the WatchNet, and it is a pretty well guarded net, but if you want to listen to it, it's 14.325. The Odin and VDEN nets, I think since I've been doing this, I've only had them come up in real world 2 times, and only maybe 2 or 3 times for an exercise. And then it was just comm check, thank you very much, and they'd turn them off or something. Local areas, RACES, Red Cross nets, and the adjacent state emergency nets. One of the things, if you're serious about this, you can look up the West Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and so on emergency nets, and I have them in my book in case we ever have to talk to them. And I'll talk to you here in a little bit about how would you talk to those guys. That's pretty close for HF, isn't it? Who knows how to spell NVIS? NVIS. Tipped over. Haven't we seen vehicles with vehicles tied, or antennas tied down someplace else, like in the Middle East? NVIS. Goes up, hits the ionosphere, comes down in a wonderful 150, 200 mile an hour, 200 mile cone. So you can talk from here, the other side of town, on HF. Communication with adjacent SKYWARN support groups if required. We've never had to do this, but Mount Holly up in New Jersey, we tried communicating with them and were successful from Sterling. We have not talked formally with Blacksburg, which is our farthest down in Virginia net. although I talk to some people down there every once in a while. Next slide. Any licensed amateur may report severe weather through the amateur radio nets. And that happens to us every once in a while. They'll be on the net coming home, and they'll call it in. And I think it started to rain out here. One of the things we try and do through classes like this is let everybody know how to report this stuff. What do we need? We find that a number of SKYWARN spotters are also Aries Racies and other emergency response groups. So you're used to this kind of stuff. You're either, most of the people we talk to are extroverts. They don't mince any words, they don't chat, they just come up and tell you, okay, this is what I need to know. And you ask them for a little bit more information, and slam bam, they get it to you, thank you, and they're gone. Amateur radio may be called on to perform emergency communications and damage assessment support, in addition to our SKYWARN mission. Now, out in Warren County, we just had a new emergency manager about a year and a half ago come in, retired lieutenant colonel, who happened to be the emergency manager for the Pacific Rim, stationed in Honolulu. Poor sweet baby. That was rough duty. But his family lives, of all places, just outside Front Royal. He got in here, and he got the idea that, golly, we need to build your program up, because we didn't have a lot of support. So he went over and kicked butt in the sheriff's office and the Front Royal Police Office. We now have full radio setups in both the sheriff's office, which is where our operations center is, and the new police department. And I might mention here, I don't think I have, Greg Butler, who's going to be talking to you, and Watts Hill are very instrumental in getting UHF, VHF, and HF communications in all of the hospitals up and down the I-81 corridor. And it was an initiative that, I forget the hospital group's name, but they all are training or will be training hams to man the hospital nets in the event of severe weather or other disasters where they need to communicate back and forth. Things like, how many beds have you got left? You know, have we got 27 gallons of blood or whatever they ask for? So that was interesting product or outcome of some of our talks. Next, what do spotters do? Who you are. And if you don't have a spotter ID, your call sign works. What are you reporting? When did the event occur? And where are you located? And I'll talk here a little bit more about what specifically we're looking for. I'm not looking for, well, I think 2 hours ago it was raining pretty bad, and I think I'm still on 66. We need extrovert type information. Just like you were one of my favorite customers I had many years ago, a Marine fighter pilot. When you're calling in direct support from a Marine F-4 Phantom, you don't want to be an introvert. Next, there we go. Now, you don't have to memorize all this, because the scripts that we read when we bring up SKYWARN, we tell you what we're looking for. If SKYWARN is activated in warning mode, we're going to tell you every 15 to 30 minutes. We're going to read that. Tornadoes, funnel clouds, or rotating wall clouds. Hail, give me the size as compared to US coins. And if it gets bigger than a quarter, sometimes I'll just hear, oh, it's about twice the size as a quarter. wind gusts in excess of 50 miles an hour measured with an anemometer. Now, I know all of you in your trucks or cars have anemometers hooked up on the top of that, and very often we'll have a separate net control who will filter out stuff and report it up to the WX4LWX. Hasn't happened in the last couple of years. Typically, whoever picks up WX4LWX at Sterling is effectively the net control, and we get the information to the forecasters. And very often it is write something down, turn around to the lead forecaster or one of the other guys if he isn't there, and make sure everybody knows, hey, 66 is flooded, wherever it is or whatever the situation is. Next slide, please. I was going to replace this in 2019. I think we've had 17 tornadoes, 2 of them in our area. Now, most of them were EF zeros, but one of the things that, you know, people will ask me is how much bad weather do we ever have? In 2011, there were 49 tornadoes, 6 people killed, 103 people injured. The highest injuries were 50 people. The longest path was 47 miles long. There's other places. And this isn't anything to match that. But if you think about it, think about what a tornado, even an EF1, would do to your neighborhood. Next slide. Okay, who's responsible for all this? Chris Strong, who's a National Weather Service warning coordinator, meteorologist, and works as a meteorologist on shifts also, is our coordinator at Weather Service Sterling. Tim Dennison, AI4TD, is our coordinator. And this is for the National Capital Area's SKYWARN Support Group. Tom Horn, he's a coordinator for Net Control. He lives up in Maryland. Rich Moriani, he's subnet coordinator. He keeps track, and I think I have a slide here. We have about 6 or 7 subnets over on the Eastern Shore, a couple, Baltimore and down the Chesapeake, a couple. We have 2 of them over in West Virginia. And the most important guy on that entire chart, by virtue of the fact that his title is longer than anybody else's, is me. Rob Seastrom, station management, he takes care of our station equipment. We're in the process of replacing some stuff on the antennas, etc. So that's, and the cast of thousands. Next one, please. What you want to know if you want to look this stuff up, if you're extroverts, wx4lwx.org. We have a SKYWARN Support Group website. So that's where you can find more information than this. Next slide. All of the weather forecast offices, I think, now I don't tie me to this, but I think just about all of them, or some groups of 2 or 3 or 4, will have a website. And their site is going to be www.weather.gov/ the last 3 digits indicates the site. And you can look these up. There's a table full of them on the web, LWX. This will get you the Baltimore, Washington site, give you the latest weather map, and down below that, and I don't think I have a picture for you, but go to the next slide, please. Nope. But will be little blocks for all the specific information you ever wanted to know or wanted to ignore, and one of them will be SKYWARN. And among other things, that'll show you when and where all the classes are. And we can talk about that here in a minute. Does it work? If you're really interested, you can look up some of the major storms and ham radio support in those storms. And there was typically a lot of them in all the major storms. In Joplin, we had SKYWARN, Emergency Communications, Red Cross, Aries Races, statewide coordination, and of course our big hurricanes in the Gulf all had ham radio support. And in some cases, I had an interesting story. I forgot get the guy's name, but somebody from up here went down to one of the hurricanes in the Gulf, and he was supposed to report to one of the parishes or counties down there and report to the sheriff. And he used his GPS and got down there, and everything was flat. But there was a squad car, and there was a sheriff leaning up against it smoking a cigarette. And the ham said, "Sheriff, where's your office?" Right there. Within 2 weeks, communications was implemented by ham radio and other means. Cell towers up, everything, but a lot of ham radio. We brought repeaters down there. We had, I think, 250, 300 hams down there. All the communication, getting all of that information back up to the counties and to the states and everything. And it was just incredible. And if Chris was here, still here, Chris Patton, he could tell you about the Puerto Rico situation. He was down there a couple of days after all of that occurred. And the one shining light was a bunch of ham radio operators starting to make lists of things and call-ins and everything else. Next slide. Oh, my favorite slide. 2012, the East Coast derecho. Now, derechos are a line of storms, in this case, a horizontal line, but sometimes it's just a wall of storms that can come across, and they kind of grab each other and move in one movement. And in fact, they feed upon themselves. And a friend of mine is working in the power industry, and he told me the other day, we were talking about this, he said, you know, there are places in Virginia and Maryland that have still not repaired all the damage from the derecho. 2012. And that tells you, oh, we're in great shape around here. Next slide. This is the important one. Radio amateurs bring a wealth of resources to the public service and emergency communications. And the second one, broad range of communication and technical skills outside of amateur radio, thus creating interoperability at both the systems and operations levels. You take a mildly extrovert operations officer and put him down in the middle of a whole bunch of stuff going on, and very quickly you will spot the other extrovert operations officers, and in very short order there's going to be a plan for what in the hell are we going to do. Because that's what we did for a living, in my case, 17 years. Many amateurs are familiar with emergency management, public service, Red Cross. I think a lot of you guys, or some of them I've talked to this evening, are kind of dual-hatted. You're doing something during the day, and what's the thing you're going to have, the Oxcom conference and all that kind of stuff. With a lot of that kind of knowledge spread out in an area like this, it really helps to get things gelled and together and start operating in the same direction. The ability to set up communication systems quickly and then effectively communicate with them. How many of you have Go boxes? Did you copy Chris Patton's? He copied mine. In fact, I gave him the parts list, and within a week he had that thing. I have UHF, VHF, WinLink, the whole 9 yards in a box. How often do you guys exercise that stuff? I just had mine out on the deck the other day just because I could. Took it out there, nice sunny day, hooked up, plugged it into one of my local antennas, and everything was working. Next slide. We need, more than anything else, desk operators at the National Weather Service and net control operators that can be done from your QTH. Hey, I said a ham word, QTH. Desk operators are critical. You know how many we have? And it pisses my wife off every time. She says, honey, you were just out there on Tuesday. Uh-huh. And there's a line of something coming across West Virginia. Next slide. What we do, say again, one of the 2 or 3 gates, tell them who you are, and magically the gate opens, you go in, and they haven't badged us yet, but I think that's coming up. You go in there, you turn on the radios, you get going, you check with the lead forecaster and see what his thoughts are, where they're going, and you bring the net up. Nobody tells you how to do it. You just do it. Now, we have a good book, all the scripts in there, but most people will vary the scripts slightly to meet the situation that we've got. But that's the first thing we need. Now, I don't know whether that's extroverts or introverts. I think it tends to be extrovert. Somebody that can pick up a radio mic and take control of the Bluemont repeater. I do it all the time. We've had people come in there and this is WX4L, doesn't work. Extroverts or somebody that uses ham radio a lot and you're used to talking on the radio. But the difference is you're telling people what you can do and not do, and you have to maintain that control. Because what we don't need is a bunch of flapjawing going on and somebody's trying to tell you that his house just got blown away by a tornado. I'm not being facetious, I'm being serious. Can we go to the next one? SKYWARN Basic 1 training. How many of you are at least Basic 1? How many are going to go to the next basic training? Ooh. Ooh. Good stuff to know. Net control or comparable experience. There's one. Couple of you. We need that. Somebody that's used to getting up on a net and taking control. It's called net control. And quick on the draw. Things can change. I mean, all of a sudden you get the net up and the next thing you've got coming in is 4 severe thunderstorm warnings. And you look at the script and they're all about 3 pages long, and they're listing every single county and city where there's a potential for a severe thunderstorm. And what you have to do is say, I'm not going to read all that. I'm just going to abbreviate that to get the word out that, oh, by the way, you've got a severe thunderstorm warning. Nobody to ask whether you can or can't. You're it. That sounds like extrovert to me. Experience in an ops center environment. How many of you have worked in an operations center? 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of you? Communications? Couple. It helps because you're more at home. When I think at the beginning of this, when Chris Patton asked me to come over and talk with him, he said, what sort of operations center? I ran the operations group at alternate National Military Command Center at Fort McPherson, Forscom, Georgia, for 2.5 years. And that's kind of interesting because you have a desk there and it's got different color phones, and one of them rings and you pick it up and there's an ops dep who's either a brigadier or a major general, and he says, get a hold of 18th Corps and tell them we need them to so-and-so. And you pick that phone up and you're talking to a 3-star Corps commander. If you've done that before, it's fun. They can't chew you out over the phone. They can get your ass fired, but they can't chew you out. Flexible schedule, retired. Got one retired. I'm a retired, and I'm as flexible as my wife will let me. Training on SKYWARN Desk Ops and OJT provided. If anybody is interested, particularly if you're a retired old fart looking for a reason to get the hell out of the house, and I bring up the net, call me, and I'll give you all my cell phone and my email, or just tell me on the radio, can I come by? You're certainly welcome, and I'll make sure you can get in the gate. Next slide. Uniquely qualified when severe weather occurs. Part of the on-the-ground eyes and ears of National Weather Service. Further the safety and welfare of your community by making emergency managers aware of hazardous weather conditions. This is not rag chewing. It's real stuff. Now the good news is, in the, what have I been doing, this 6 or 8 years, we haven't fortunately had any real bad stuff involving people. We've had some pretty significant property damage, but not much more than that. Ask us how to become a part after the presentation, or I'll give you my cell phone and my email. You can shoot me a call or a phone or an email. Next one, please. Questions? Sir.
About SKYWARN training, when does the SKYWARN training take place? So, for example, there are probably people here who might be interested who aren't trained, who might take training. Where and when is it? And then my second question is, we talked about level 1. Can you talk about, is there level 2 training? I think you alluded to that, but could you clarify that and let us know when that training is?
Please repeat the question too. So
the question is, I think, how do we get training? And the top guy on the list of people, Chris Strong, is the guy to contact. He's the National Weather Service coordinator. And I forget the young lady's name, she just took over there. They will fit you in on the schedule. There are some rules, I think at least 25 people, and provide a place. This would be fine. They come, with their slides and everything else. It's about a 2-hour session. At the end of that 2 hours, you get another, this is how amateur radio fits into it. Somewhat similar to this, but a little bit more detailed. Second part of that question was?
You had the level 1 training on the slide, but I thought you also said there might be like level 2.
The level 2 is the different, like winter storm presentations. The general presentation covers a little bit of everything, and that gets you the basic. If you look at the SKYWARN page on the National Weather Service, it'll show you the different classes, and that's basically what they go to. Now, if you have a unique requirement, and there are enough of you, and you scream loud enough, very extrovert, you can probably talk them into, well, we can do that for you in 2017 or something. I don't know. Any other questions? Next slide. Oh,
Is it?
N4PSS, I'll give you a new one, N4PSS.ops, and I've got some cards here, at gmail.com. N4PSSops at gmail.com. 703-795-6985. If a woman answers, tell her she's very beautiful and can I speak to Paul?
Well, thank you, Paul. Thanks for all of that. If anybody has any questions they want to ask Paul after we close here, please hang around, and he's going to pass out cards, I guess. And then you can trade those cards for Mickey Mantle, or no, it's baseball season.
I got a
Get
better
further
deal
away.
than Mickey Mantle.
Okay, so what's the Nats score? 1-0 in the third inning. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Okay, so we're going to meet again in 2 weeks right here, and the presentation is going to be on, Mike?
Leon? What?
Leon, what's the presentation on?
Oh, next week, it's new methods in radio direction finding.
New methods of radio direction finding. So, you guys. Hand community. Okay, we're going to learn about hand community in the forum, and then we're going to do direction finding in the main presentation. And you had one more comment? We did. I did. Should. Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for your time. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for being the only guy that can go out to man the desk. And all of you have a good evening. Go home and watch the Nats.